Our basic casing recipe is going to be 10 parts peat moss, 10 parts vermiculite, and either 1 part calcium carbonate, or you can use 1/4 part hydrated lime and 1 part gypsum. Make sure if you do use hydrated lime that you get agricultural hydrated lime. Don't use the stuff made for masonry or cement. And then when we get it all mixed up, we'll pasteurize it at 140 to 160 Fahrenheit or 60 to 70 Celsius for 1 hour. Well, the first thing you want to do, as you can see here, is to break up the peat moss. They pack it pretty tight into bales to ship it, so you have to loosen it up fine first. And then once we get it all broken up and loose, we'll be adding our lime. You can either use calcium carbonate at 1 part out of 10, or you can use hydrated lime at about 1/4 of a part to 10, the amount of the peat moss. And we'll be mixing all of our dry ingredients together first. Then we'll add moisture, we'll hydrate the peat moss. Then I like to hydrate the vermiculite separately because it holds a little bit more moisture than the peat moss does. So if you hydrate each one of them separately, then mix them together later, it seems to work out better. So let's watch. I found if you get the gypsum and the lime wet before you mix it in, it'll stick together, and then you'll have areas where your pH isn't balanced right. So mix the dry ingredients first and then add water. It'll work a whole lot better for you. You know, mixing these dry ingredients like this does throw up a bit of dust in the air, so if you're sensitive to it, you might want to wear a dust mask or even maybe put on some goggles to keep it out of your eyes. You'll notice I like to squeeze it down, and you'll see me do that quite a bit. And I'll squeeze it down. It's kind of like a sponge, you know. It wrings the moisture into all the little nooks and crannies, and then you can leave it sit and then come back, and you'll almost always need to add some more because it'll gradually absorb it over time. Of course, if you get it too wet, it's easy just to squeeze the excess back out again. can see my high-tech method here for mixing them together. I just try to take about half the peat and move it over to the worm, and half the worm and move it over to the peat. I have a larger bowl that I usually mix this up in, but it's a stainless steel bowl. And no matter how I've tried to position these bright studio lights, I can't stop the glare. So that's actually the reason I went down and bought these they're wooden salad bowls. They cost me about 40 bucks a piece. But it was the only way I could take a decent video without getting glare. Unfortunately, we can't use them for salad because I use this to mix horse manure and everything else. So they're pretty much dedicated for the mycology hobby. Well, as you can see, we'll continue adding moisture, stirring, adding moisture until we get it to field capacity, which we're going to describe in just a second here. I like to pack it down tight, as you can see, and then walk away and drink a cup of coffee, and then come back and check it again, because packing it down tight will let the moisture sort of equalize, and then we can fluff it back up and check it. And we're looking for field capacity. Every grower describes it a little bit differently, and with experience you'll come up with your own definition of field capacity. But briefly stated, the way I look at it, if you pick up a handful of your material, you don't want any water whatsoever to be dripping out of it just from gravity. If it does, it's too wet. If you squeeze gently, you'll get a couple of drops out, and if you squeeze hard, you'll get an actual small rivulet or stream that'll come out, but only for a few seconds, and then it'll stop. Let's watch. See, when I squeeze hard, a lot more comes out, but then it stops. So let's do this one more time here. You'll notice I pick it up and you don't see anything dripping out at all. But now watch my fingers. When I squeeze a little bit, there a drop comes out, and then when I squeeze hard, now you see a few drops come out and then stop, and that's field capacity. The next step is going to be to heat up our casing material. We want to kill the mold spores that are on it. We're only going to heat it up to about 140 to 160 Fahrenheit, 60 to 70 Celsius. That's going to let the bacteria survive, but it's going to kill off the mold spores. Very important to get a thermometer. Just go get a little $5 meat thermometer at the grocery store. You can see here the jars are moving. The water is boiling, but the thermometer hasn't come up yet. And once it does, once you reach about 140 Fahrenheit or 60 Celsius, shut your stove off. The temperature will go ahead and climb a bit more and then stabilize. If it drops back down below 140 before your hour is up, just turn the stove back on and heat it up again. You'll have to babysit this the first couple of times you do it, and then once you get the procedure down for the particular jars you use or the particular kettle you use to boil in, it'll become automatic. But the end result is you want 140 to 160 degrees or 60 to 70 Celsius for 1 hour. You want to allow plenty of time for your casing material to return to room temperature, and then it's time to apply it to your fully colonized bulk substrate. Now you can see here I'm not wearing surgical gloves or anything else. I have washed my hands. I washed them again with alcohol, but it's not a sterile atmosphere. We don't have to wear a surgical mask or gloves. Now I'm using a thin lasagna type tray. It's only about 1.5 inches of substrate. So I'm going to put about a 1/2 inch of casing material on here, just under 1 centimeter. If I was using a thicker tray or a spawn bag, I might go up to about 1 inch of casing. We want to spread that out, and when about 20% of the casing layer is colonized, when you have mycelium poking through, we'll go ahead and introduce it to fruiting conditions and begin misting at that time to try to replenish the moisture that's evaporated out. Some species benefit from what we call patching, where the first few places that mycelium shows through the casing layer, you apply fresh casing over the top of them. Other species don't benefit from that, so I would suggest you consult Paul Stamets' Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms for the growing parameters of whatever specific species you're growing. Poke just a few small holes, as you see here, in the top of the foil for gas exchange, and don't forget to label it with the species, strain, and the date you applied the casing.